Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, December 10, 2025. Federal Reserve cuts interest rates 0.25 percentage point. Fed Chair Jerome Powell says after 3 cuts this year, the central bank will wait to see how the economy evolves before it decides on future cuts. Coming up, we hear from the chair and President Donald Trump and speak with The Hill's business editor, Sylvan Lane. House Speaker Mike Johnson presents a range of health care reform bills to House Republicans that could be voted on soon. Not among them is the Democrats' priority, extending expiring Affordable Care Act insurance premium enhanced subsidies. The House debates and votes on the annual National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, after a bit of drama on a procedural vote where a handful of Republicans initially voted no and could have derailed the bill if they didn't switch their votes. Supreme Court hears argument about how states should determine what makes a criminal defendant intellectually disabled and ineligible for the death penalty. Today's case involves a man who scored just above the accepted threshold on multiple IQ tests. We'll talk about it with Ian Millhiser, Vox Media Supreme Court reporter. And the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer speaks at a Congressional Hanukah Menorah lighting. Associated Press writing the Federal Reserve reduced its key interest rate for the 3rd time in a row Wednesday, but signaled that it may leave rates unchanged in the coming months, a move that could attract ire from President Donald Trump, who has demanded steep reductions to borrowing costs. Wednesday's cut reduced the rate to about 3.6%, the lowest it has been in nearly 3 years. That was from AP. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell made the announcement at a news conference at Fed headquarters in Washington, D.C.
My colleagues and I remain squarely focused on achieving our dual mandate goals of maximum employment and stable prices for the benefit of the American people. Although important federal government data for the past couple of months have yet to be released, available public and private sector data suggests that the outlook for employment and inflation has not changed as much since our meeting in October. Conditions in the labor market appear to be gradually cooling, and inflation remains somewhat elevated. In support of our goals, in light of the balance of risks to employment and inflation, today the Federal Open Market Committee decided to lower our policy interest rate by 0.25 percentage point. As a separate matter, we also decided to initiate purchases of shorter-term Treasury securities solely for the purpose of maintaining an ample supply of reserves over time, thus supporting effective control of our policy rate.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell at a news conference today in Washington. A reporter asked him about future rate cuts.
Howard Schneider with Reuters. Just first turning to the statement, just to be clear, we're on the same page here. The insertion of the phrase, considering the extent and timing of additional adjustments, does that indicate that the Fed is now on hold until there's some clearer signal from inflation or jobs or the evolution of the economy along the baseline outlook?
So, yes, the adjustments since September bring our policy within a broad range of estimates of neutral. And as we noted in our statement today, we are well positioned to determine the extent and timing of additional adjustments based on the incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. That new language points out that we'll carefully evaluate that incoming data. And also, I would note that having reduced our policy rate by 75 basis points since September and 175 basis points since last September, the Fed funds rate is now within a broad range of estimates of its neutral value, and we are well positioned to wait to see how the economy evolves.
More now on the Federal Reserve's 0.25 point interest rate cut announced today. Joining us on the phone is Sylvan Lane, business editor with The Hill. Thanks so much for being with us. Coming into today, a lot of reporting said the Federal Reserve is divided, but it would likely make a cut. Today we found out just how divided. 3 dissents. That's a lot, isn't it?
That's right. That's the most dissents to any Fed decision since 2017. And while it's not unusual for 1 or 2 members of the committee, which goes up to 12 voting members, to dissent, 3 is a bit notable. Now, Powell downplayed the divides among members in his press conference today, saying that the FOMC generally agrees on what the issues facing the economy are. They just differ over how to tackle them. And that 9 out of the 12 members voting for one decision, given a situation where the Fed's dual mandate is kind of in tension with itself, is not that bad of a spread.
That Fed mandate, low inflation, high employment, how has the Fed been trying to balance tackling both of them?
So for the past 3 meetings, the Fed has been acting in a way that's meant to kind of guard against the employment side of that mandate slipping. What does that mean in normal terms? The Fed is concerned about the economy slowing down over the year, specifically how much slower the job market has gone and how job gains have really fallen to a crawl, and want to cut rates to make sure that if there is some underlying weakness in the economy, they're well positioned to respond to that. Now, of course, the risk of cutting rates right now when inflation is already higher than they want it to be is that inflation could keep going higher, fueled by the lower rates. Powell said today that there's a case to be made that the inflation could start to dissipate once Trump's tariff announcements settle down. But of course, anybody following the president's trade policy knows that it can change very, very quickly and without much notice.
Well, speaking of those tariffs, it has now been, I guess, more than half a year that the president's high tariffs have been in place. I remember earlier this year, the Fed chair said that we need to wait and see. Have they gotten to the point where they can do some analysis about it?
Yeah, so Powell said today that they are just now starting to see a lot of the inflationary impact of Trump's tariffs, but that because of the nature of supply chains, the way that businesses respond to this, that we won't necessarily see the full impact of those tariffs that were announced 6 months ago until the end of the first quarter or March of next year. Now, of course, if the president raises tariffs or dramatically changes them one way or another, that could bring more price increases down the road. But because of the nature of how long it can take these tariffs and the goods themselves under these tariffs to get into the United States and hit the U.S. economy, it's hard to say when for sure this tariff-driven inflation will be done with.
We're talking with Sylvan Lane, business editor with The Hill. What role did the lack of complete government data due to the shutdown have on the decisions?
If anything, it probably made the Fed more cautious and more inclined to cut rates in the absence of information that pointed definitively one way or another toward doing so. The private sector data that came in during that time showed American consumer confidence slipping pretty drastically, higher announcements of layoffs, slower hiring from the September jobs report that we eventually got in December. But the fact of the matter is that, the signs of the economy slowing down were apparent and the concern is apparent. And the Fed doesn't necessarily need a federal jobs report to tell them that. The inflation side is a little bit more complicated because of, the issues we were just talking about with how tariffs affect prices. But, given where the Fed is and how hard it could be to stop a recession once it's started, Powell made clear today that they're keeping a closer eye on the employment side than the price side.
And finally, what about 2026? What types of rate cuts, if any, did the Fed suggest we could expect?
So it seems, based on current projections, that most Fed officials expect 1 or 2 cuts next year at the most. The outlook was actually fairly optimistic if you look at their economic projections. If Fed officials on the median see higher economic growth, lower inflation, and unemployment about where it's at. And Powell said that could be attributable to things such as AI increasing the productivity of American workers, which of course means that fewer might need to be hired by businesses. So that balance, he said, should work in the long-term favor of workers and households. But of course, with all of these rapid evolutions in AI technology, it remains to be seen how that really affects the economy, and both on the short and long term.
Sylvan Lane, business editor with The Hill. You can find his article about business issues, including today's Federal Reserve interest rate cut, at thehill.com. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And Wall Street reaction, the Dow up 497, NASDAQ up 77, S&P up 46. President Donald Trump spoke about today's interest rate cut when he met today at the White House with business executives, including from Dell, Qualcomm, and IBM. He spoke in the context of their planned investments in the U.S. economy.
When we announce good results, the market should go up. Now it's when you announce good results, Michael, the market goes down because they say, oh, that means things are good. That means we're going to kill it by raising interest rates. I think it's really wrong. It should be the opposite of what it is now. It should be the way it used to be. We announce good results, the market should go up, and we should keep driving it up and have it keep going up and let it be much, much bigger, much, much better. And, growth doesn't mean inflation. They're always afraid that, and if there is inflation, that's okay, then we can slow it down. But we should be able to do a lot better than 3 and 4. We're scheduled to be at 4%, which is pretty amazing because we have a deadhead Fed hair. I mean, this guy, the head of the Federal Reserve is a stiff. And, you fight that. It's amazing. We fight that, and yet interest rates are going down, except with him, not too much. He did a rather small number that could have been doubled, at least doubled. And that's the other thing. I think the rates for the United States are always the lowest in the world, because without us, there is no world. Without this economy, there's no world.
President Donald Trump at the White House holding a roundtable with business leaders. This is Washington today. Politico writing that House Republican leaders presented no firm plan for advancing health care legislation as anxiety rises in the GOP ranks over the impending expiration of key Obamacare subsidies at the end of the year. Instead, Speaker Mike Johnson presented attendees of a closed-door conference meeting with a list of 10 possible policies that could get votes in the coming weeks or months, according to 5 Republicans in the room. Some were more specific, such as an expansion of health savings accounts and overhaul of pharmaceutical benefit manager oversight. Others were vague, including one bullet point that simply said innovation. The list did not include an extension of the expiring tax credits. The presentation was followed by a heated discussion over the path forward on health care for the party, and vulnerable members, including Congressman Jen Kiggans, Republican of Virginia, stood up to warn against the political fallout of failing to extend expiring subsidies of the Affordable Care Act. That was from Politico. Congressman Ralph Norman, Republican of South Carolina, spoke to reporters outside that meeting.
Congressman Norman, it seemed like you were coming to a consensus in there on the health care plan.
Yeah, the consensus is we need to come up with something that's, that moves the ball forward. We don't want to discharge the petition. That will hurt everybody. You get nothing. So I think you'll see us working pretty much around the clock to try to come up with something in a positive way. Not everybody's going to agree on what we get, what we don't get, but what is in place now is not working.
Did leadership indicate there would be a vote before you leave for Christmas break?
They want to have a vote. Now, the devil's in the details of how we work through it. I think we've got a consensus.
Why do you all need to have a vote next week?
Why?
Yeah.
Well, why not?
Is it going to pass?
Why not? It's not going to get passed. I mean, it's true. Why not? What's going to change? Most people have to re-engage in January. And I think they need as was said earlier, they need an off-ramp, not a bridge that's down. So why not?
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Norman.
Congressman Ralph Norman, Republican of South Carolina, speaking to reporters outside the closed meeting of House Republicans this morning. Later, Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, and other House Republican leaders held a news conference, and the speaker spoke about the Democrat support for extending the expiring Affordable Care Act enhanced premium subsidies versus what he plans to bring to the House floor for votes.
There are 2 parties in this town. One has no intention and no plan and no desire to lower your health care costs. They really haven't put any good idea on the table. They just want to subsidize a broken system. Check them on that. The Republican Party, on the other hand, is already demonstrating that we know how to do this. We're not just talking about it, we've done it. In the Working Families Tax Cut, you will remember, in the Medicaid reforms, we went after program integrity. We didn't change the substance of Medicaid, as they've claimed falsely. We went to program integrity. Why? Because we owed that to the American taxpayers. We got ineligible recipients off of Medicaid, and we cut out the fraud, waste, and abuse. And the CBO said they've calculated it saved $185 billion for American taxpayers, and it reduced premiums. We reformed it to strengthen Medicaid. Those same principles are going to guide us in the months, in the days and weeks and months forward. As Leader Scalise noted, we have some low-hanging fruit. We have some things that every Republican agrees to. Democrats won't. Remember, they don't actually want to fix this problem. But you're going to see a package come together that will be on the floor next week that will actually reduce premiums for 100% of Americans who are on health insurance, not just the 7%. Remember, the COVID-era subsidy only covers 7% of Americans, and it was passed and extended without any reforms at all. It would only reduce their premiums by 4%. So they're using that as a red herring. The overall system is broken, and we're the ones that are going to fix it. You will see that laid out.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, at a news conference today. House Democrats also held a meeting this morning, and some of their leadership then held a news conference. Congressman Pete Aguilar of California is the Democratic caucus chair, and he spoke about health care.
We're here today because Donald Trump and House Republicans are failing the American people. They're failing to address the healthcare crisis that they've created. They're failing to lower costs, and they're failing to make life more affordable for hardworking Americans. Families are struggling to get by, yet Republicans continue to be more focused on building on the bidding of their billionaire class friends than helping people that they represent. Ahead of the holidays, Americans are seeing prices go up for gifts and groceries, and the family gatherings that they are planning are becoming more expensive. On top of that, Republicans have no real plan to ensure Americans' health care premiums don't skyrocket before the end of the year. They highlighted that and stood for that even just moments ago. For months, House Democrats have been sounding the alarm that Republicans need to work with us on extending the Affordable Care Act tax credits to keep health care costs low for American families. And we've put forward a plan that has the support of every single member of the Democratic caucus. We only need 4 Republicans to join with us in signing a discharge petition to prevent the American people from losing their health care coverage. Because we know when people don't have health care coverage, they don't stop getting sick. They don't stop needing medication. They don't stop needing to take their kids to the doctor. If they can't afford to go to the doctor, they won't see one, or they'll go to the emergency room, which is the highest cost, most expensive way to get care and limits our already burdened healthcare system. Which Republicans will be brave enough to join us? We just don't know. The American people can't afford inaction from Republicans, and it's time that they put politics aside and do the right thing. Lower costs, save healthcare, put the American people first.
The House Democratic Caucus Chair Pete Aguilar of California at a news conference with other House Democratic leaders. New York Post writing a Senate Republican bill would deposit up to $1,500 directly into Americans' health care savings accounts is drawing praise from President Donald Trump. President Trump told reporters aboard Air Force One on Tuesday night, "I like the concept. I don't want to give the insurance companies any money. They've been ripping off the public for years. Obamacare is a scam to make the insurance companies rich. Billions and billions of dollars is paid directly to insurance companies." The bill is an attempt to reduce mounting costs for the 24 million Americans on Obamacare. The bill is headed for a procedural vote Thursday, along with an $83 billion measure put forward by Senate Democrats to extend all Obamacare subsidies for 3 years. That was from the New York Post, and you'll be able to follow the Senate debate and votes live on C-SPAN 2 television and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. And, of course, we will cover it here on Washington Today on Thursday. The Senate today voted 50-49 to begin debate on a bill that would overturn the Health and Human Services Department decision earlier this year to do away with public notice and comment requirements for implementing certain regulations that have been in place since 1971. Senator Angus King, independent from Maine, is the sponsor of the bill.
Secretary Kennedy, in his confirmation hearing, used a term that, frankly, I had never heard before, but he used it repeatedly: radical transparency. He said, we're going to have radical transparency. And we went back and looked. He used the term transparency something like 100 times in his response to questions, either in his hearing or in his written responses. This was a basic premise of what he presented to the Congress in his path to confirmation. This is the opposite of radical transparency. It's radical obfuscation. It's a deliberate action. He had to take an action to rescind this, what had been the rule for the Department of Human Services, as I say, for 54 years under presidents of both parties and different administrations. And what we're really talking about is simply allowing the public to know what these proposed actions will be and ability to comment. What's wrong with that? What's objectionable about that? It doesn't slow things down appreciably. It's not a huge impediment to executive action. And we're not talking about emergency actions. We're talking about fundamental policy decisions being made by the department.
Senator Angus King, independent from Maine, on the Senate floor. Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican from Louisiana, opposed this bill.
This well-meaning CRA is not needed. For decades, Congress has allowed agencies to fast-track regulations on bureaucratic topics that do not impact the public. The policy that is sought to be overturned merely aligns HHS policy with this long-standing exemption. It does not change the process for major regulations that impact the public. The courts have weighed in repeatedly on agency processes for issuing regulations. Fast-track procedures can only be used in a narrow set of circumstances. We should be, if there is a concern about the HHS policy, the goal should be to change the law, not pass this CRA. And there's been an implication that reductions in force would have gone through rulemaking if HHS still had the Richardson waiver in place. That's actually not true. The reductions in force are governed by an Office of Personnel Management regulation implemented by HHS. So, with that said, I object to the unanimous consent.
Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican from Louisiana, on the Senate floor before the Senate voted to advance this bill. The vote was 50-49. 3 Republicans voted yes with the Democrats: Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, and Tom Tillis of North Carolina. Senator Steve Daines of Alaska did not vote. The bill being brought up under the CRA, Congressional Review Act, that allows Congress to reverse executive branch regulations with a simple majority vote, so it can't be filibustered in the Senate and require 60 votes to break the filibuster there. But if it's passed by the House and Senate, it can still be vetoed by the president, so that would require a 2/3 vote in Congress to override. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. today was part of an announcement at the Agriculture Department of a $700 million pilot program to support regenerative farming, which focuses on the health of the soil to produce more nutritious food. It's part of Trump administration's Make America Healthy Again, or MAHA, campaign. Here's the secretary.
This is the fulfillment of a promise that we made in the MAHA report. The MAHA report, which we released 2.5 months ago, has 120 recommendations for how to transition, how to eliminate the chronic disease epidemic and transition to a healthier America. And among those promises, among the recommendations of the report, was the promise to make it easier for farmers in this country, to give them an off-ramp. Farmers who are dependent on inputs, on chemical and fertilizer inputs, to give them an off-ramp where they can transition to a model that emphasizes soil health, and with soil health comes nutrient density. And without coercion, through voluntary action, to give them good incentives to do well by doing good for themselves, for our children, and for the country. I'm very, very happy to have as a partner in this endeavor Brooke Rollins. I've been working on farm issues for 30 years, and this is the first USDA secretary who I believe is really committed to giving us, we already have the healthiest food supply in the world, to making a food supply that's even healthier, that's going to sustain, again, a transition to a much healthier America for our children.
Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. at the Agriculture Department in Washington, D.C., along with the Ag Secretary Brooke Rollins and the Administrator of CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Dr. Mehmet Oz, and regenerative farmers from California, Missouri, and Indiana. A Spectrum News article on this pilot program announcement has this: the World Economic Forum estimates that more than half of the world's agricultural land is degraded by heavy machinery, fertilizers, and pesticides. It projected that within 50 years, there may not be enough healthy soil to feed the world. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Hey, 6th to 12th graders, think you've got something to say? C-SPAN Student Cam is your chance to create a documentary on a topic that matters to you. This year's theme, exploring the American story through the Declaration of Independence. Win up to $5,000 and have your video featured on C-SPAN. Submit by January 20th. Details at studentcam.org. Your voice, your story, Student Cam 2026.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. AP writing, the Supreme Court on Wednesday struggled over how courts should decide borderline cases of whether convicted murderers are intellectually disabled and should be shielded from execution. There was no clear outcome apparent after the justices heard 2 hours of arguments in an appeal from Alabama, which wants to put to death a man who lower federal courts found as intellectually disabled. Joseph Clinton Smith, 55 years old, has been on death row roughly half of his life after his conviction for beating a man to death in 1997. Supreme Court prohibited execution of intellectually disabled people in a landmark ruling in 2002. Justices in cases in 2014 and 17 held that states should consider other evidence of disability in borderline cases because of the margin of error in IQ tests. And the issue in Smith's case is what happens when a person has multiple IQ scores that are slightly above 70, which has been widely accepted as a marker of intellectual disability. That's reporting from Associated Press. Here's some of the Supreme Court oral argument in the case Ham v. Smith. Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson questioning Robert Overing, Alabama Principal Deputy Solicitor General.
What if the scores were 69, 68, 69, 69, 75? I mean, would you concede in that case that it was the actual IQ is below 70, or would you still argue, well, 75 is above, so we're going to look at all sorts of other things?
Well, the burden would still be on the offender to prove a likelihood that his IQ is 70 or below, and so he'd have to come with a method. Here, Smith didn't.
He'd have to come with a what?
With a method for assessing those scores. Here, Smith didn't, so his claim fails. We have an argument that the highest score should be given more probative weight because there are many ways that an IQ test can underestimate IQ if the offender is distracted, fatigued, ill, or because of the incentive to avoid the death penalty.
Well, it does say you can see why that might be regarded as a little results-oriented. When you have scores above 70, you want to average them and discount the one below. But when they're all below, you don't do that. You instead say you got to look at all these other factors.
It's not results-oriented, Your Honor, because there is a scientific warrant behind it. And we have to think about what IQ tests are doing. They're trying to measure the capacity for intellectual performance. And so someone's best score is the best representation
of their best. But Mr. Overing, it seems to me that you are actually changing the standard. You've accused the district court and the Court of Appeals of doing so, but in our case law, consistently, we've said that the first prong relates to a showing of significant sub-average general intellectual functioning. The words IQ score under 70 does not appear. That's not the standard. I appreciate that that's one of the ways in which science has determined that you can make such a showing, but we also have allowed for evidence related to adaptive functioning to be taken into account when looking at intellectual functioning. So I think what you've done is shift this to be all about the IQ test in a way that is not supported by our case law.
Atkins cited the 4th edition of the DSM, and I think the phrase that you just used appears in that edition. And then further defines what general intellectual functioning means. And it used to mean an IQ of 70 or below. Before that, it was 65. Now they're saying it's 75. But IQ has always been the primary criterion by which intellectual...
Primary, but not the sole. And we've never said it's been the sole. And what the district court did here was look not only at the IQ scores holistically, but also other evidence of adaptive functioning. And that's precisely what our case law says that the courts are supposed to do. So let me ask you, why do you think that the test should be simply and solely IQ score cut off at 70?
IQ is originally how intellectual disability was defined as a condition, and it's always been the primary criterion, and states are allowed to take the best evidence of intelligence and to make that the test.
Robert Overing, Alabama Principal Deputy Solicitor General, questioned by Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson in the Supreme Court case Ham v. Smith. And joining us now to talk about the oral argument is Ian Millhiser, senior correspondent with Vox Media. He covers the Supreme Court. Thanks for being with us. You wrote, it's unclear whether a majority of the court will vote to save Joseph Clinton Smith, who's on death row in Alabama and who argues it's unconstitutional to execute him because of an intellectual disability from being killed by the state. But several key justices appeared sufficiently skeptical of Alabama's argument in this case that it is at least possible that Smith could prevail. That's from your article at Vox.com. Why did you reach that conclusion?
I'll confess that I am a bit surprised by my conclusion. So this case is the latest chapter in basically a quarter-century-long fight about whether it is constitutional to execute someone who has an intellectual disability. The Supreme Court first ruled in a case called Atkins in 2002 that it is not constitutional to do so. But Atkins, three members of the court's right flank dissented. As that right flank has grown, it has continued to dissent in a lot of these cases involving intellectually disabled death row inmates. And so I thought now that there's a 6-3 Republican majority on the Supreme Court, it was really likely that the court was going to roll back Atkins. They might make significant changes to how the court approaches cruel and unusual punishment. And at least based on what I heard at today's oral argument, it seems like we're likely in for a more modest opinion. And it may even be the case that several key justices who have previously criticized Atkins or sought to limit it might have reached their peace with Atkins, and maybe that's just not something that this court is going to come for.
Which side was the federal government on, the Trump administration?
The Trump administration sided with Alabama here. I mean, for the most part, this has been a fairly partisan issue. When Atkins was decided, there were some moderate Republican appointees in the majority. It was written by Justice Stevens, who was a Ford appointee, and I believe that Justice O'Connor and Kennedy, who are both Reagan appointees, joined it. But in the 23 years since Atkins, the court has become more polarized. There are distinct Republican and Democratic wings in a way that there weren't 20 years ago. And so I wasn't surprised to see a Republican presidential administration aligning with the view that historically the Republican flank or the Republican faction on the Supreme Court has taken.
You wrote a preview article with the subhead, Ham v. Smith is a death penalty case, but it could have big implications for anyone accused of a crime. You just said that perhaps that's not the case, but why did you raise that possibility?
Yeah, so the court has sent some very confusing signals lately on what it thinks about the Eighth Amendment, which is the amendment which prohibits cruel and unusual punishments. About 6 years ago, there was a case called Bucklew v. Precythe, and what you need to know about Bucklew is that the law for the last 60 years has been that the courts decide whether a punishment is cruel and unusual by looking at what it called evolving standards of decency. So we ask, is this punishment unusual today? And the more unusual a punishment becomes, the more likely it is to be declared unconstitutional. In Bucklew, Justice Neil Gorsuch wrote the opinion, and it was a majority opinion. It got 5 votes. where he said that he seems to say that really what we should be doing instead of, okay, well, whether or not it is cruel and unusual today, is we should ask whether it was cruel and unusual in 1791. When the Eighth Amendment was originally ratified. And that would be a massive transformative change. I mean, among other things, it's not clear that there are limits on excessive punishment if you go back to the way that things were in 1791. And so I read Bucklew, and I saw that it got 5 votes, and this was 6 years ago when I read it. I thought, wow, these guys really, really want to change how we have approached criminal punishment for more than half a century in the United States. And then since then, Bucklew is kind of laid dormant. I haven't heard too many of the justices saying, like, hey, we should do that thing that Gorsuch said we should do 6 years ago. And so it's confusing. I mean, one reason I was watching this recent Ham case so closely is because I was looking for signs as to how eager these justices really are to remake the Eighth Amendment. And, I mean, I don't know. Maybe Bucklew was a misfire. I mean, I do not know why this case got 5 votes 6 years ago, but then the court seems to have dropped this revolutionary approach that Gorsuch advocated in that case.
And finally, on this case today, Ham v. Smith, when might we expect a decision?
It's a good question. I suspect it will probably come in late June because the most contentious cases always come in late June. And while I thought that, I wasn't entirely sure how this case was going to come out based on the oral argument, I think that there were definitely 3 justices who are going to vote in favor of Mr. Smith, the inmate. I think there were definitely 3 justices who are going to vote in favor of Alabama's ability to execute him. And that's enough of a divide that normally the justices are going to be arguing amongst themselves for, a good number of months.
Ian Millhiser, senior correspondent with Vox Media. His beat includes the Supreme Court. You can find his articles at vox.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is Washington Today. And now to the war between Russia and Ukraine. ABC News writing the Ukrainian negotiating team is, quote, finalizing work on the 20 points of a fundamental document that could define the parameters for ending the war. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said in a post on X Wednesday. Zelensky is referring to the 20-point peace settlement proposal that Ukraine, the United States, and European leaders have been working on for weeks. Ukraine expects to, quote, deliver this document to the United States in the near future, following work with the U.S. negotiating team and European leaders, Zelensky added. The article also says President Donald Trump, French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer spoke earlier Wednesday about the ongoing peace settlement talks, a Downing Street spokesperson said in a statement to ABC News. And at the White House, President Trump was asked about all of this.
You spoke to some European leaders today, I think, sir. I did. Could you tell us about that? And is there a revised peace plan that Ukraine has presented? Yeah. The leaders of France we spoke to, and Germany, and UK, all very good leaders, very good friends of mine, and we discussed Ukraine in pretty strong words. And we'll see what happens. I mean, we're waiting to hear answers before we progress. We're not spending any money in Ukraine. We're selling basically missiles and everything else to NATO. And NATO is paying us, and then they distribute it to who they want. I guess they're mostly distributing to Ukraine, but we're not spending money. But we are. We're spending a lot of time and a lot of effort because last month 27,000 soldiers were killed. Both, think of it, 27,000. That's if you take a football game and take half the stadium. That's 27,000. So 27,000 soldiers were killed. Russian and Ukrainian soldiers were killed. And I want to see that stop. We'll find out. Look, there are a lot of things happening right now. A lot of people say it's closer than it's ever been. It's a war that would have never started. If I were president, would have never started. It's a war that should never have started. But we'll have it figured out, I think, within a pretty short time. You say very strong terms, sir. Could you explain that? Well, I think we had some little disputes about people. And we're going to see how it turns out. And we said before we go to a meeting, we want to know some things. They would like us to go to a meeting over the weekend in Europe and we'll make a determination depending on what they come back with. We don't want to be wasting time. Sometimes you have to let people fight it out, and sometimes you don't. But the problem with letting people fight it out is you're losing thousands of people a week. It's ridiculous. The whole thing is ridiculous.
Mr. President, 2 questions. One, the oil tanker. Who owns that oil tanker?
You'll get that information later.
Okay, and have you spoken to Maduro since your last conversation?
No, I haven't.
It's only been one conversation.
No.
And when you say that the European leaders want to have a meeting over the weekend, are you talking about with Zelensky or with them?
With Zelensky and us.
And you said in an interview yesterday that you think it's time for Zelensky to start accepting things. What things are you talking about?
I think he has to be realistic, and I do wonder about, how long is it going to be till they have an election? It's democracy. It's a long time. They haven't had an election in a long time. It's losing a lot of people, and it's possible that the people, if you look at the polls, I will say 82%, there was a poll that came out, 82% of the people are demanding a settlement be made, Ukrainian people. They want to see a settlement be made. I understand that. They're losing thousands and thousands of people a week. They want to see it ended. And I do say, at what point, when do they have an election in Ukraine? That's not casting dispersions on anybody, but they do have a massive corruption situation going on there. And they do say, when are they, people are asking this question, when do they have an election? Are they going to have an election? Or are they going to just keep it going like this? So I think it's time to get that war settled. And I think it's a war that can be settled. But it takes two to tango.
President Donald Trump answering reporters' questions at the White House during a roundtable meeting with business leaders. In between the questions about the war in Ukraine, you heard a question about an oil tanker and Venezuela. Attorney General Pam Bondi posting today, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Homeland Security Investigations, and the United States Coast Guard, with support from the Department of War, executed a seizure warrant for a crude oil tanker used to transport sanctioned oil from Venezuela and Iran. For multiple years, the oil tanker has been sanctioned by the United States due to its involvement in an illicit oil shipping network supporting foreign terrorist organizations. This seizure, completed off the coast of Venezuela, was conducted safely and securely, and our investigation alongside the Department of Homeland Security to prevent the transport of sanctioned oil continues. That was the post from Attorney General Pam Bondi. Here is more on this at the news conference at the White House with President Trump.
Mr. President, thank you. Can you explain a little more about this Venezuelan oil tanker and share a little more information?
Well, I'll let the people do it, but you see the result, and I guess they probably have released the pictures by now or pretty soon. You'll discuss that with the appropriate people later on, but no, it was seized for a very good reason.
President Trump at the White House. CNN writes the daughter of Venezuela's opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, spoke of the country's fight for democracy as she accepted this year's Nobel Peace Prize in Norway on behalf of her mother, who was unable to attend the event. The Nobel Peace Prize laureate had been expected to attend Wednesday's acceptance ceremony in Oslo in defiance of a decade-long travel ban placed on her. She had been in hiding since last year, resurfacing only briefly as a protest in January against President Nicolas Maduro being sworn in after a disputed election. That was from CNN. Here is Ana Karina Sosa Machado at the ceremony in Norway.
I want to express our infinite gratitude from my family, from an entire country, to the Norwegian Nobel Committee. Thanks to you, the struggle of an entire people for truth, for freedom, for democracy and peace is today recognized around the world. I am here on behalf of my mother, Maria Corina Machado, who has united millions of Venezuelans in an extraordinary effort that you, our hosts, have honored with the Nobel Peace Prize. But although she has not been able to be here and take part in this ceremony, I must say that my mother never breaks a promise. And that is why, with all the joy in my heart, I can tell you that in just a few hours, we will be able to embrace her here in Oslo after 16 months living in heaven. And as I await that moment to hug her, to kiss her, to embrace her after 2 years, I think of the other daughters and sons who do not get to see their mothers today. This is what drives her, what drives all of us. She wants to live in a free Venezuela, and she will never give up on that purpose. That is why we all know, and I know, that she will be back in Venezuela very soon.
Ana Karina Sosa Machado, daughter of Nobel Peace Prize laureate Maria Corina Machado, at today's ceremony in Oslo, Norway. Back in the United States, the Hill newspaper reporting the House on Wednesday easily passed the annual defense policy bill, sending the mammoth $900 billion measure to the Senate ahead of the year-end deadline. The measure, known as the National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, passed the lower chamber by a vote of 312 to 112. 94 Democrats and 18 Republicans opposed the bill. Here's some of the floor debate before the vote. Congressman Mike Rogers, Republican of Alabama, chairs the Armed Services Committee.
I'm proud to present the final National Defense Authorization Act of fiscal year 2026. This is a good product that was worked in a bipartisan, bicameral fashion. This year we focused a lot of our efforts on fixing the Pentagon's broken acquisition process, which is failing our warfighters. The fiscal year 26 NDAA includes a series of reforms to put commercial solutions first, eliminate regulatory burdens, and end bureaucratic inertia. It also puts in place a system that will deliver capability to the warfighter at the speed and scale that we need. Fixing acquisitions will go a long way toward ensuring our warfighters are the most capable fighting force on the planet. Properly equipping our warfighters is critical, but so is ensuring we recruit and retain the best and brightest. Toward that end, the FY26 NDAA continues to make improvements in the quality of life of all of our service members. This bill supports the Trump administration's 3.8% pay raise for all service members. It authorizes nearly $3 billion for construction of barracks, family housing, dining facilities, medical facilities, child care centers, and schools. And it also improves the service member access to mental health services. Our committee will continue to make improving the quality of life of our service members a top priority every year. We need a ready, capable, and lethal fighting force because the threats to our nation, especially those from China, are more complex and challenging than at any point in the last 40 years. The FY26 NDAA counters the threat from China and ensures mission success in the Indo-Pacific. The bill includes a number of provisions to rid adversaries from our defense supply chain. It extends the Pacific Defense Initiative, enhances the U.S. posture in the region, and improves our ability to conduct military operations in the Pacific. It also bolsters Taiwan's defenses and helps build the capacity of our allies in the region. Furthermore, this bill increases the lethality of our forces to prepare for and deter global threats.
Congressman Mike Rogers, Republican of Alabama, Armed Services Committee Chair, debating on the floor before the House passed the $900 billion National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA. The committee's ranking member, Adam Smith, Democrat of Washington State, also supported the bill.
Has truly been a bipartisan process. I'm not in love with everything in the bill. There's some other things I would have liked to have seen included, but I really compliment Chairman Rogers and the majority staff for having worked with us throughout that process and worked with the Senate. I thought we had a very good bicameral, bipartisan agreement this year. And the chairman's right. The highlight of this bill is acquisition reform, something that our committee has worked on for quite some time. But the last 2 years in particular, we have been really focused on how to get this right. And this is the most ambitious swing at acquisition reform that we've taken. And I know that can sound sort of dry. Acquisition reform doesn't exactly excite people, but it's really important because what it's about is getting the Pentagon to be able to buy the equipment, the innovative equipment that it needs to adapt quickly, so that our warfighters can have what they need to meet the challenges of the modern battlefield. Way too slow right now, too many programs way over budget, not delivering as advertised. Speeding up that process and delivering a better product is an enormous priority for this country to meet our national security needs, and this bill does that, and the House really led on that, and I think it's really important. There are other key aspects of this bill. We have others outside of the jurisdiction of the NDAA who are part of this, including Coast Guard reauthorization, Foreign Affairs reauthorization, and the Intel Committee's reauthorization. Those are important to meet our national security needs as well. There's also a very important component on countering UAS domestically, the threat that drones pose to many of our military installations and other sensitive areas in the country is a real problem. This bill takes a step towards trying to address that. I'm also very pleased that this bill does, I think, a meaningful job of trying to reassert some legislative authority, to truly be the co-equal branch of government that we say we are. We show strong support for Ukraine with $400 million in USAI. We block the president's misbegotten efforts to pull troops out of Eastern Europe in this moment and really reassert the ability of our committee to exercise oversight. We have a fence on the travel budget for Secretary Hegseth until he follows the law and releases the videos for all of the boat strikes that are going on right now in Latin America, and also until he gets us the execute orders that by law he is supposed to get to us. We also have a requirement in here that if any senior level military officer is going to be fired, Congress has to be notified and a reason has to be given. So overall, I think this bill is a good balance of the interests of both sides, in the Senate and the House as well. It's a good product that we should be supportive of, and with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Congressman Adam Smith, Democrat of Washington State, ranking member on the Armed Services Committee, debating on the House floor. The House went on to pass the National Defense Authorization Act by a vote of 312 to 112, sending it to the Senate. The Hill article writing about this also has this. While the final vote wasn't close, legislation's passage wasn't without some drama. The bill had barely cleared a key procedural vote just hours earlier. House leadership held the vote open for more than an hour as Speaker Mike Johnson persuaded Republicans Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, Anna Paulina Luna, and Tim Burchett to flip their no votes to yes. They said they did so after receiving assurances from GOP leadership and administration officials. Roll Call writes the compromise House-Senate fiscal 2026 National Defense Authorization Bill includes requirements and restrictions for military training flights operating in Washington airspace, but stops short of mandating National Transportation Safety Board recommendations included in a bipartisan Senate measure. The legislation is a response to the fatal mid-air collision between a commercial flight and a Black Hawk Army helicopter in January. That was from Roll Call. This was addressed today at a news conference with the NTSB chair, Jennifer Homendy.
I want to start by saying this is not something normally where we weigh in so strongly on legislation that is moving before the House and Senate. But given that the DCA investigation is really our agency's highest priority right now, we think it's important that we talk about what is happening with NDAA. So the NTSB vehemently opposes Section 373 of the National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA. This section, to the lay reader, is drafted to seemingly enhance safety. I want to be very clear that it does not in any way enhance safety. In fact, it reverses safety changes made after the mid-air collision, after issuance of our urgent safety recommendations, after the Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy, rightfully implemented our urgent safety recommendations and essentially gives the military unfettered access to the crowded and complex D.C. airspace. In fact, it would allow the Secretary of any military department, generals, flag officials, to allow training missions in the D.C. airspace to take place without key safety reforms put in place after the January 29th mid-air collision. This is a significant safety setback. It represents an unacceptable risk to the flying public, to commercial and military aircraft crews, and to the residents in the region. It's also an unthinkable dismissal of our investigation and of 67 families who lost loved ones in a tragedy that was entirely preventable.
Jennifer Hamady, chair of the NTSB, National Transportation Safety Board, holding a news conference at her agency headquarters in Washington, D.C., about a provision in the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, that passed the House today and is heading over to the U.S. Senate. And finally, on Washington today, House and Senate leaders of both parties held a Hanukah Menorah lighting ceremony on Capitol Hill. The Jewish holiday begins December 14th, running through the 22nd. Here is the Senate Democratic leader, Chuck Schumer.
This is always a special event for me. As the highest-ranking Jewish elected official in American history, the significance of lighting a menorah here in the United States Capitol is not lost on us. It's a reminder of how far the Jewish people have come in our long, winding history. As we know, the story of Hanukah is, among many things, a story of perseverance in the face of unspeakable hatred. It's a story about how the Jewish people of a different age, forced from their land, forbidden to practice their religion, their temple desecrated, gathered to pray in secret, banded together in the hills and fields, and fought off their attackers. And once victorious, they set about the hard, slow work of rededicating the temple and lighting the eternal flame of hope. Today, thousands of years, that flame still burns, but in too many places, it's flickering. The evil forces of anti-Semitism, neo-Nazism, and other forms of hatred and bigotry are running rampant in our society. And too many, far too many, are silent against these threats. But when it comes to anti-Semitism, silence is dangerous. When we stay silent, that's when the poison of anti-Semitism spreads like wildfire. We have seen that throughout our history. The word Hanukah means dedication. We surely need that today.
Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, the minority leader, today at the Congressional Menorah lighting on Capitol Hill with other leaders of the House and Senate of both parties. The national Menorah lighting will be in front of the White House. That'll be on December 14th, first night of Hanukah. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Before we go, a reminder, there are now more ways than ever to follow C-SPAN, including on YouTube TV. Current and new subscribers have access now to C-SPAN, C-SPAN 2, and C-SPAN 3. Find out more at tv.youtube.com. Have a good night.